Thank you all very much for joining us for this session. I have been working in the archives field, as has been said, for more decades than I care to remember at this point. And one of the things that I was very excited, passionate and curious about right back from the early days in the 1990s was digital preservation and digital archiving. And during my roles in the higher education, university sector, and now the financial sector, as well as the government, I've participated in projects that have sought to enhance our digital corporate memory, sought to ensure that the records that we have in our digital form that need to be kept permanently receive the same kind of care and attention and specialist focus as our paper records have for many decades now. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I was appointed to the role of Group Archivist at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia 4.5 years ago, and we've embarked on a very intense and very interesting journey to introduce digital archiving and digital preservation at the bank, which is a financial industry first. So I'm excited to be able to share that journey with you today and hope that it may connect with where you're at in your organisations. I'd love the session to be interactive, so if you've got any questions or comments or need clarification, just let me know. Saves me from talking for the entire time. So like a good high school debater, I like to set out our terms, just so that we're all on the same page to begin with. So this is something that I've adapted from the Digital Preservation Coalition site. So at the Commonwealth Bank, we define digital preservation as the coordinated and ongoing set of processes and activities that ensure long-term, error-free storage of permanent digital records with means for retrieval and interpretation. The key bit there is the retrieval and interpretation. Yes, we need to preserve the records. Yes, we need to make sure that all the bits and bytes, all the ones and zeros are in the correct order and that they're not messed with, either through technological change, hardware change over time, or through changes in operating systems or format obsolescence. But there's no point in preserving it if you can't access it, if you can't retrieve it, if you can't use it. So those two components are critical in terms of our approach. And advocacy. One of the things I've noticed, and I'm not sure whether it's something that you can relate to as well, is that sometimes as information management professionals, as archivists, as records managers, we're not always the best in putting ourselves out there. We're not always the best in making the case that what we do is important, that what we do is critical to the organisation. So I think the promotion of our work, the promotion of our mission is key to getting the resources and the commitment from our executive. And it means you need to be bold, you need to be passionate advocates. I think, as was said in one of the earlier sessions, we need to get over our imposter syndrome. We need to be in the room where the decision makers are organising how they approach information management across the organisation, and we need to assert ourselves. So I'm particularly passionate about the idea of advocacy in the digital preservation space. My own journey, specifically with that, began back in 2001 when I attended a digital preservation conference in Maastricht. It was still pretty early on with things at that stage. And for me, there were whole new concepts. And over the next 10 years, it was really a self-education process for me. But I realised that for us, particularly in the archives field, this is the future, and this is where we need to be. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the CBA archive so that you have a bit of context. So we are the repository of the permanent records of the bank, so the records that need to be kept forever. Our paper records date back to 1953, even though the bank itself only came into existence in 1912. That's because we also took on the records of various regional and state banks that were merged into CBA over time. We are the keepers of the CBA story, legacy and memory. So we've recently opened a exhibition space and vault in Redfern in Sydney, and part of what we're doing is promoting the history of the bank and the history of the financial services sector within Australia. We have 6.8 million digital artefacts, so we've been quite active since around the 2010s in pulling in digital records in various formats, and I'll go into that in a bit. And we've got over 2,000 linear metres of paper and archives, photographs, films. We've got a very large object collection. So it's actually quite a significant collection, and up until relatively recently it's been quite hidden away. So in terms of the demand, and it's important to understand our customer base to understand how we advocated for getting the resources to undertake these digital preservation activities. So we get quite a lot of demands from regulators in the courts because in various regulatory and legal matters, the CBA team will need to refer back to documents, policies, procedures that were existing in the 1980s, or they were existing around the year 2000. So, and some of those compulsory information gathering powers are quite intense. We can get a request that we have to service within 1 or 2 hours, and if we can't service that request, there's potential penalties that the bank will incur if it can't provide that information in time. So it's actually quite time critical and urgent. We also service internal customers, so our customer remediation teams, if a customer has a problem, will often need to refer back to the policies and procedures that governed that relationship of the customer with the bank. We also provide information to the CEO's office and to the retail banking service. And we also offer a service externally. So ex-employees will come back to us. You know, they may have been working in the bank in the 1960s. They need to confirm something relating to their superannuation. We also get inquiries from galleries and museums to lend some of our objects, and occasionally academic researchers as well. So in terms of our digital archives, you can see there that we're responsible for nearly 7 million digital artefacts. Most of those digital artefacts are effectively versions of the CBA intranet policies and procedures. So every month, the IT teams would capture a version of the intranet in its entirety. So what you end up with, so you'll see from 1993 to 2009, we've got close to 4 million digital objects, and those are all captures of a particular point in time, the intranet site. The reason why we need to keep all that is because if a customer took out a home loan in 2002, but the onboarding procedures changed between January and August, we need to know when that change was so that we can know what the customer agreed to at a particular point in time. So it's quite an extensive archive. As is the case with most organisations, especially in that very early period, you can see there we go back to 1993, they didn't really have any kind of migration protocols in place. And the bank is very innovative and rapid in its technological change. But what that means is they're focused on the customer-facing, direct customer-facing interfaces or procedures, not necessarily at the back end where we deal with. So a lot of the migration work was somewhat haphazard, and we ended up receiving most of those records from 1993 to 2009 in a series of about 76 CD-ROMs. Now, the majority of those CD-ROMs were only accessible via a Windows XP machine. So we had this vast amount of records that the regulators and the courts required us to have access to, and we had a single point of failure, effectively. Now, when I came into the role, I was naturally somewhat nervous about this. So one of the first things I did was look at the history of how this has come to be and look at what was done to try and address this single point of failure. So you can see our digital advocacy journey has been more than a decade long. So we first raised the risk, and it was my predecessor. I've only been in the role since 2019. We have emails showing that that risk was raised in 2012. So that's quite a long time ago. And then we raised it with our Line 1 risk teams, and then we raised a specific risk relating to the XP machine, because we knew in 2016, Microsoft had alerted us that XP would no longer be supported. When XP is no longer supported, the bank no longer supports it, and cybersecurity consider it to be a major risk, because there's a whole lot of, there's no security patches going forward. So in 2018, we did have some movement. We got funding for a business case to address some of our digital preservation risks. Unfortunately, that funding only went up to the discovery phase and didn't progress, and funding was withdrawn. We had a tantalising period where we did get a database, and then it disappeared like a mirage in the desert. In 2019, and that's the year that I arrived, we were reviewed by group audit. Now, most parts of the bank, when they're reviewed by group audit, find this a less than pleasant experience. We were very excited because we were able to say to them, there are so many things that are at risk here. There's so much danger in losing this information. There's so much danger that we will not be able to provide these kind of services to our customers, that we could fail in our responsibilities to legislators and the courts. And so the group auditors came away saying to us, you know, this is the best experience we've ever had. People usually hate us. And I said, no, please write this up. Please bring this before the executive. And so we got quite a high level group audit risk incident that was against the XP risk in particular. The beauty of that is that it was assigned to be resolved at a group executive level. So it wasn't just us that said it. Ownership was taken at a level where they were accountable for providing a solution. So after that, we went through another round of trying to get funding from 2020 to 2021. And then around 2022, after a very extensive process, we settled on our preferred service provider, which was Preservica. Now, I'll talk to you about, and then at that point, we got seed funding to continue the project, and then there was something else that happened that added a sense of urgency that I'll talk about in a bit, because that's really important. So one of the things in terms of our advocacy journey is that we had to create a story. It's all about the story. It's all about the narrative. So we try to keep things as simple as possible. The first thing was that we had to communicate urgency. So I think the issue with archivists in particular is that we tend to think decades in advance. We can see a risk that might not be realised for 20 or 30 years. The people who are operating in the here and now are worried about the risk that's going to happen in the next 12 months. So if we say to them, well, this is going to happen in the next 20 years, they'll be like, oh, we'll be in our next job by then, or we've retired. That doesn't have an immediate impact on them that they have to resolve, because they've got a million other things that have got an immediate impact that have to be dealt with now. So we had to communicate urgency. We had to speak to what matters in terms of the bank. The two things that matter to the bank are customers and risk. So our narrative was centred around those two pillars. and we had to leverage connections, so we had to build allies. So I basically sent the archives team out to talk with anyone who would speak to us. Really just to network, to let people know that we're there, to sit on the meetings when they're talking about records management generally. And over a period of time, we raised our profile and we were able to build allies. We were also very careful about our messaging and our branding. I think we had to keep it as simple as possible. So the messaging, in terms of our mission, we had a 3-word mission, which is to preserve, inform, and build. So that was to preserve the past, inform the present, and build a brighter future for all. So, and we created banners so that when people come into our workspace, they see that. We put in our email signatures, and that stuck in people's minds. Because at an executive level within the bank, people change roles every couple of years. So they're not necessarily going to spend a lot of time looking at your manifesto. They want the elevator pitch. The other thing that we really focused on was that it was both a marathon and a sprint in terms of getting funding, in terms of promoting digital preservation. So it's a marathon in as much as we started way back in 2012. It's a sprint is when those opportunities arise, you have to rush to embrace them, and you have to move fast. And that's something that we experienced. So in terms of our branding and our messaging, I mentioned that we recently opened a new facility, and we actually used some of our branding to give the feel and the ambience for what Group Archives is about. And people remember those images. People remember that feeling. So when you ask them for money, they think, oh yes, we visited the Group Archives 6 months ago, and that was a really fantastic experience. I think the way I look at it is that if you're talking about international relations, you have soft power and you have hard power. Archives don't have much hard power. I mean, we can't tell people what to do. But we have a lot of soft power. We can influence and we can persuade. So that's the approach that we took. The other thing that we really focused on, especially during COVID and lockdown, was in terms of our policy infrastructure and our policy and procedures. So the bank is a highly regulated environment, and we needed to be able to show that we too were meeting standards and benchmarks that people are going to invest in us. So, and shortly after I first arrived, we worked with Deloitte and the Chief Data Office to create a new records management policy that specifically called out Group Archives as being the recipient of the permanent record of the group, and there were mandatory transfers of permanent records to us. We also, in terms of digital preservation, we had that specifically called out in the records management policy, especially in relation to the OASIS standard. And that proved quite critical early on, because when you start getting into the project funding phase, if there's a specific policy mandate, it increases your chance of getting funding because they know they have to comply with policy. We also work quite closely with our colleagues in the Chief Data Office in terms of the IT reference architecture. So we were able to insert digital preservation both into the records management reference architecture and the digital storage reference architecture. One of the key things there that I think is worth pointing out is that there was a lot of confusion early on between the concept of archiving in the IT sense and digital preservation in the sense that archivists mean it. So archiving in the IT sense quite often just means backup, or having multiple backups. It doesn't mean all the processes and policies and procedures and microservices that are necessary to do digital preservation. So what we did within the records management policy and the storage RA is that we made this distinction between mutable and immutable storage. So immutable storage was IT backup. Immutable storage was the permanent record that the Group Archives held. And that was critical as well in just cementing that definition in a way that was understandable to our IT colleagues and to our group executives. And then I mentioned during lockdown, when we couldn't access the archives, we basically created this. So we created statements, policies, SOPs. Each one of those boxes represents a different policy or SOP or principle or guideline. It would seem like overkill for a team of 5 people, but it really does make a difference, because we posted that on our One CBA site, and then when people ask us, well, what is your policy on this, or what is your procedure for that, we simply point it to them. And it's been designed in such a way that it's understandable by non-archivists. So basically the 2 years we spent in lockdown or working from home, we managed to use quite productively. The other thing that really we focused on, I mentioned customer. So we get about 1,200 inquiries per year, and we needed around at least 2 FTEs just to handle those. So in order to speed up our customer service, the bank understands about automation. So we were able to speak into that end-to-end automated digital experience in terms, and bring in digital preservation in a way that the bank was able to understand. I've already spoken a bit about the regulatory demands. And in terms of the vulnerabilities, the material that's held by group archives is of relevance sometimes to our most vulnerable customers. So there may be people who are having problems with their mortgages, having problems with repayments. They need to know exactly what their environment was when they committed to that. Sometimes the documentation at their end might be lost. So we were able to show that we actually had a direct customer impact, as well as meeting some of these regulatory roles. The key thing for us, I think, in getting us over the line was in the area of risk. So the bank uses the 5x5 risk matrix. As I mentioned, the 5x5 risk matrix only projects out 12 months in advance, which is not much use to us normally, except our XP machine was breaking down. And if that XP machine broke down, we'd lose access to all that information. So that raised the risk level. The other thing is that we, while this was carrying on, while we were trying to onboard a new system to manage our digital assets, we're moving our physical repository. So we moved from CBD out to Redfern. We were able to show that there was an increased level of risk because of the physical move. And I think combining that theoretical but very real risk of the XP falling over and our physical move, where we needed intellectual control of the physical collection and also moving this ancient XP machine with danger in of itself, that really provided an opportunity for us to get the funding we needed to do the job. I've spoken a bit about audit and about the leverage as well. I think the main thing I'd really want to point out is that we had to create a real life threat or an impression that this is something that's going to impact you as our executives. There's not some distant horizon. The horizon is very near and very immediate. Just a bit on the results, just so give you a bit more of a flavour of what we're dealing with. So when we're talking about those intranet sites, there was basically 4.7 million HTML files that look like that sitting in directories. So what we were able to do, and then those are the directory structures. So each intranet website instance would have had a subdirectory and multiple directories beneath that. So it was a very complex corpus. What we were able to do with Preservica was that we were able, and it took us quite a long time to figure it out, we needed to know what the source URL is, that seed URL that you see in the little browser window that tells you where all the root documents extend from within a site. Once we were able to do that, we were able to import all those directories into Preservica and create a multi-part asset. So all the original files are preserved in their entirety. There's authentication, checksums, all the things you'd expect to make sure those records were continue to be viable. And then we were able to create these multi-part assets and turn them into WARC files. Now though, oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. There was a video there, but we're just running a little bit short of time. But basically what that does is that each of those WARC files is a website instance for a particular date. And so it'll give you a view of that website in 2007, 09, 12. So it provides us basically with an instantaneous retrieval for that information, which we haven't had before because we had that single XP machine that an archivist had to sit at to produce the information, and now anyone from across the bank is going to be able to do it. And that's just apropos of nothing, it's just our new facility, which I'm rather pleased with. All right, any questions or comments?
How did you only have one XP computer?
This is a question I've asked myself many times.
Well, no, your IT team maintaining it, like, they must have.
The bank reached a point where it decided it didn't want to maintain XP anymore. When I arrived, there were 12 XP machines throughout the organisation, and that quickly got down to 1. And then there was just a policy decision to no longer support it. So and from the point of view of the IT infrastructure, our little XP machine was neither here nor there. So part of our advocacy was saying, if we don't have this, it's going to have this impact. All right, thank you.